Okay, bonjour. So this lesson is about articles. And the first thing that you have to know in French is that nouns always need an article. They always need an article in French. D'accord? So that's your biggest thing. We're going to write it all right away. Nouns always need an article. And this is not the case in English. You might say something like, I want food. Cool. I want being your verb and then food being a noun. There's no article attached to it, and that's okay in English. English and a few other languages get away with that. But for the most part, languages, especially Romance languages, need to see an article so that they have information about that noun. So we've already learned about the definite article this year, le, la, and les, and you use le, la, and les to refer to something that you've referred to already. So if you say, for example, je veux la nourriture, that's I want the food, as in the food I've already talked about. If you haven't talked about food, French people will understand it as all food in the world. So, je veux la nourriture. I want all food in the world. Maybe a little extreme, but that's the information that le, la, and les gives you, either something specific or everything. D'accord? There's also what's called an indefinite article, and you know how to use these very naturally. The indefinite article is un, une, and des. Now, think about the word food. Can you say, I want a food? Or let's look at des, which means some, but it's plural. Can you say, I want some foods? No, it's not possible. And that's because there are two types of nouns in both French and English. D'accord? And that's going to bring us to our other type of article. The du, de la, and de plus L apostrophe is called a partitive article. It doesn't exist in English except in the word some plus something that's singular. So I want some food would be translated as je veux de la nourriture. D'accord? This is opposed to, I said now, des also means some. So all of those mean some, du, de la, and de L apostrophe, but des also means some plus something that's plural. D'accord? So some apples is going to be des pommes. D'accord? Okay, so what's the difference between apple and food? Apple is what we call a count noun. You can count how many apples you have. I have 1 apple, 2 apples, 3 apples. D'accord? There are also what are called non-count nouns or mass nouns. Food is an example because you cannot say, I have 1 food, 2 food, 2 foods. See, it doesn't work. 3 foods. And so when you're trying to think, wait, is it a count noun or a mass noun? That's the question you ask yourself. Can I count it? If it's a count noun, you can count it. Cool. Let's look at an example that's a little bit between food and apple. And it can actually be both count and non-count. So the word coffee, right? Coffee, instinctually, I'm like, oh, it's non-count because you don't say 2 coffees. Oh, except wait, yes, you can. D'accord? Let's just look at it. So if I say, je voudrais bien un café, using the indefinite article, un, d'accord? That means I would love a coffee. Je voudrais bien un café. I would love a coffee. Now, notice that is also the word for one. D'accord? Je voudrais bien un café. They're going to give you 1 coffee because means 1. But in French, it's the same word. So, yeah, that's 1. You can count a coffee as in a cup of coffee. D'accord? You could also say, nous voudrions des cafés. We would love some coffees. D'accord? Now, this can be translated 2 ways as well. It could be, we would like coffees. D'accord? You may have learned, I don't know if you learned this in the junior high, that day is when you have a plural with no article in English. D'accord? If you've got a plural with no article, you need to say day. I'm going to write that down. You don't necessarily have to write it down, but it is a good thing to know. Use day when you have a plural with no article in English. We would like coffees. Nous voudrions des cafés. You need to have an article in French. That's a big thing. So when you're writing compositions, if you leave out an article, it's wrong. And I'm going to write a little arrow and say article. I'll write art. Now in English, you can also use the article day if you put in. So if it's got no article, if you can put the word some in there, you know that you're using day. D'accord? As opposed to lay, which it could be lay as well, if there's no article. And I digress. Count nouns can use the indefinite article. Because the indefinite article is used with things that you count. Un café, des cafés. One coffee, some coffees. 1, 2, 3 coffees, however many coffees as there are people. Now, coffee is also a non-count noun. Je voudrais bien du café. That's the article you're going to use. So the partitive article is used with mass nouns, du, de la, and de plus L apostrophe. D'accord? Since coffee is masculine, d'accord, it's going to use du. So, je voudrais bien du café. So we use du, de la, and de L apostrophe when we want to express, now it's called the partitive article because we're expressing part of a larger whole, part of a larger concept that exists. So remember I said if you say je veux la nourriture, I want all the food in the world. You want to say je veux de la nourriture. De la literally means of the. So I want of the food. All the food that exists in the world, I want some of the food. D'accord? It's basically what you're saying. So of all the coffee in the world, I would love some part. D'accord? And that's the weird thing, that this translates as some, but if it's followed by something singular. D'accord? So you could say, I would love coffee to your waiter or waitress. Oh, je voudrais bien du café. Literally, I would love of the coffee. And that's translated as I would love coffee or I would love some coffee. It means both. But in any case, mass nouns, or if you're referring to something as a mass, they use the partitive article. All right, so we've got some countable things and some uncountable things. I'm not going to make you choose between them yet, but notice how all of these things are countable and how all of these things are non-countable, and ask yourself as you're going through each one, oh, can I count this? Oh, yes, I can. Ask yourself for every single one. You have to do that as an exercise in your own brain as you go along. And then you're just going to look, is it masculine, feminine, or plural? Yeah, it's back to that, back to choosing masculine, feminine, or plural. You have to know the rules. So for example, a friend, we're talking about a male friend here because it's un ami. Well, it's ami with no E, so it's un ami, a friend. D'accord? Non-count nouns, on the other hand, riz, look at the word rice. Does it end in a naked E or O-N? No. So we're going to say du riz, of the rice, for rice or some rice. Bon. There's 6 different types of count nouns. You don't really have to know this, but this is basically continuing with the exercise from before. Things that you can count include people. So just go through and put your indefinite articles to show that they're count nouns. Une fille, un avocat. Un chat, une bactérie. So people, species, objects, units of measurement, groups, and any abstract concepts like idea, plan, etc. Those are all things that you can count. I have an idea. I have a plan. They're very easy to identify. Again, just count. Partitive articles are usually used with substances. So again, continuing activity 2. So if we have l'eau, that begins with vowel, so we're going to use de l'eau. You can count, or you can't count, water or money. Those are both substances. If it's part of a greater whole, so bread, d'accord? When we say bread, you don't typically say I have one bread, two breads. We're talking about bread as a concept. It's some whole piece, and we have some bread of all the bread that exists. Same with chocolate. Of all the chocolate is a substance. And these two kind of run into each other, the parts of a greater whole and substances here. So voila, you have part of something bigger. Three is things too difficult to account. So rice. Um, you can't count. I mean, it's difficult to count rice. And if you want to count it, you count it in grains. You don't count rices. It's not a thing. Same with sand. Grains of sand, not sands. And then there's some abstract concepts like patience. You don't say one patience, two patiences. D'accord? So that's going to be de la patience. And then languages as well. You don't say one French, two French to refer to the French language. The French language is ever evolving. It's like a substance, so you say du français. Bon. Oh, tricky last rule, but it's a big rule. Non-count nouns take only de or d apostrophe after the words besoin and pas. So when you're doing this practice, this last one, you'll use de or d apostrophe if you see the words pas or besoin in front of a non-count noun. Cool. So if it would use du or de la or de apostrophe, and you've got pas or besoin in front of it, you just use de. Cool. So let's do two examples. Italian, as in the Italian language, count or non-count. One Italian, two Italians. Well, when I'm referring to people, but let's refer to, well, this is capitalized, so it's definitely Italian. It's not referring to an Italian person. It's Italian language. See, there's a lot that's going through your head when you're doing this. So this is going to be the language Italian, which is non-count. De l'italien. Okay. Next one. Sable, sand. If we want to say no sand or not any sand, we're going to say pas de sable. Pas de sable. Why? Because sand is non-count, A. So it would be de la sable, of the sand. But since there's a word pas in front of it, we make it just de. D'accord? So there's a lot to think about with these. I might need to give you more practice. We'll see. All right. That is it. Et voilà.